Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast. Hey there, Kate.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Okay, guys, today we are going to dig into another juicy topic, one that I think a lot of you will be excited about. We're going to talk about scaling your copywriting business to 5-figure months. And of course, I'll be honest, it took me a second to be like, wait, what, 4, 5? So we're talking about getting yourself up to $10,000 and beyond per month, which not only gets you to 6-figure years, but gets you above 6-figure years. And as we will always say, money is not the only thing that matters in this business. You didn't get into copywriting just to make money. That certainly should be a part of it, right? We're not doing this for free, and the work that we do is very valuable. But there are all kinds of other wonderful reasons to get into copywriting. So I want to preface that by saying that it's very fulfilling. You end up helping a lot of companies and organizations. So I don't want us to forget that when we're doing an episode like this, when we're focusing on money. But money is important. It is good to be paid well for performing a valuable service. You deserve to be paid well for performing a valuable service. And as such, we're going to talk about exactly what you need to do and what you need to focus on to get yourself from your 4-figure months to your, maybe it's your high 4-figure months, and even, as we say, into your 5-figure months. Because not only is it possible, but it's probable if you follow some specific steps, which we're going to talk about in this episode.
Yeah, so I think the first thing and the first place to start, you're going to be like, really, Kate? But this is what I see happen more often than not, is that copywriters don't actually account for all of their time. You might feel like, okay, here's my project rate and this is what it is, and or even if you're working hourly and here's my hourly rate. In both of those scenarios, I can guarantee if you track all of your time very, very closely, say to the minute, but every like 15 minutes, writing down exactly what you're doing and tracking that for a week or two, you're going to find areas where, oh, I didn't account for that. Or, oh, I sent this email and it actually took me 15 or 20 minutes to write this email. I had all these great questions to send the client, and this email actually became a mini task, not just a, hey, how's it going? There might be things you're not accounting for, like invoicing. And frankly, I roll my invoicing into the project rate. That takes 15 minutes or so. So that's 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there. And you're like, yeah, 5 minutes, it's not a lot of time. That time adds up over the course of a week, a month, a year. That is thousands of dollars that you may very well be leaving on the table. In fact, I guarantee you're leaving money on the table that you're not even realizing. So it's all these sneaky things that you're not actually budgeting time for. And I think email is one of the biggest ones. But if your client has a Slack channel with you, or they text you or they message you, and all of these things, I would highly recommend that anytime you're doing something, even, oh, that was just 5 minutes, nothing should be less than 15 minutes of your time. And quite frankly, maybe more, because the time it takes you to switch in and out of tasks, you're actually spending time on the front and the back end, getting into your email, sending that email. Okay, I've sent that email. Now what am I doing? And you're getting into the next project. So all of this time that just becomes this black hole, you need to figure out what this time is actually attached to.
Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to this, you're like, all right, well, I'm time tracking and I realized that I didn't account for this in this previous project. We're not saying that you can then go back to your client and say, hey, I didn't realize that I didn't charge you enough for this project. Unfortunately, that's going to have to be a lesson learned. But the reason we want you to do this is because when if you quote an email project for X amount, and then you actually track the time that you spend on that email project, and you realize that you're actually spending twice as much time, which certainly happens all the time, spending twice as much time as a project as you budgeted for, you have effectively cut your hourly rate in half. and you're doing a lot of work for a lot less than you should. People forget to factor in meetings with clients. People
Mm.
forget to factor in multiple rounds of revisions. People forget to factor in research time. You might need to get to know this company, dig into previous things they've written, learn about their target audience, all of these kinds of things. And to Kate's point, factoring in times for quick little calls or quick little emails or all of that kind of thing, they should all fall within your project. Kate's right that it is the number one place that we see people leaving money on the table. You are charging $500 for a project when, if you actually looked at the hours that you spend, you should have charged at least $1,000. You might be thinking like, well, why are you telling me to track my hours before you even tell me to increase my rates? Like, if I want to make more money, shouldn't I just increase my rates? No, because if you increase your rates and you're still doing all of this unaccounted for work, you're still going to end up working for less than you should be. Now, yes, you should evaluate your rates on at least a yearly basis, and there's certainly an argument for increasing your rates once a year, once every couple of years, and increase the hourly rate that you factor into your project. But that's not going to fix the problem. And I think that a lot of times people think, well, if I just charge more, then I won't have to worry about figuring out the time that I'm going to spend researching. And I want to, but you can't charge enough to make up for the fact that you are doing free work for a client. It's not going to end up
Yeah.
well for you.
You need to know where your time's going. And I think a lot of people who do project pricing, which, recommend, but if you feel like, well, we agreed to the project rate, so this is it, no matter what happens with the project, you still want to track your time for every project you do so that you can reevaluate, so that you can say, oh, here little time sucks that I didn't think about. Or with this client, I know that these types of meetings are going to pop up, and keep notes for all of your different clients, because you might have to factor these things in a little bit differently, especially with recurring clients, as you get to know them and you get to know some of their nuances. I have one client who just the amount of meetings just tends to bubble, 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 bubble. So there's a lot of room for that bubble. And you need to account for that. Even if you're like, well, we agreed to $5,000, so it's $5,000. No, because if they come back and want to do another project, you want to be prepared with a more accurate rate and a more accurate reflection of where your time's going.
Absolutely. Well, and that's another important thing to consider too, the concept of coming back for another project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have told you guys my story, and we'll have to see if we can find it and link to it. I think it was in the
Yes.
biggest mistakes episode of
Yep.
a big client that I lost. And I actually got back again years later, but I lost out on the opportunity to make probably hundreds of thousands of dollars at the very least, because I was lazy, because I sat back and let her bring projects to me instead of being proactive and suggesting projects. And I'll let you listen to that episode to get the full details. But repitching your current and previous clients is an excellent way to help increase your income, because first of
Mm-hmm.
all, they already know you and they like what you do. You don't have to prove anything to them. They already know that you're great to work with. They already know that you have a lot of quality work, and they also know, or I should say, the work that you do is high quality, and you also know their company, which makes it just a little bit easier to write for them. But you also know what's going on with their company, the ins and outs. So you may be easier for you to suggest new projects.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to repitching clients is you need to get a foot in a door with a client in the first place. And knowing that sometimes you might not, actually, a lot of the times, clients don't want to give you their biggest, highest ticket projects right off the bat. If they've never worked with you, they may very well, if you have a recommendation for them, absolutely pitch what, if they need an entire email funnel, great. But know that they might want to start you off with a smaller project just to make sure it's a good fit for everyone. And so once you do, if there's a company you really want to work for and they're willing to pay your full rate, you're not discounting rates here by any means, and we'll get to that. But they're willing to pay your full rate, but it's just one email, or it's a smaller project where you're like, how is this going to get me to a 10K month? It's going to get you there because you get your foot in the door and say, okay, I really love working with this client. Now I'm going to repitch them. Now that I've proved myself, I'm going to pitch them something bigger.
Well, and I know that sometimes too, when we talk about repitching, people think, well, but I don't want to like come back to them and ask them for more work. But that's not what, first of all, it's not what pitching is about. And that's not what repitching is about. You're only going to pitch a client if you have identified a project that would be useful to them, right? And that would help them build their business. You're not going to repitch them on a project that doesn't make any sense. That wouldn't make any sense for you as a professional. But because you're in a company, and if you haven't yet landed a client that you have this opportunity to do with, or maybe you haven't landed your first client yet, it might be kind of hard to understand what this could mean. But if you're working with a client, you're in there and they're going to be talking to you about what projects they're working on. They're going to talk to you about what their goals are. They're going to talk to you about all these kinds of things. And as you're inside and working with them and getting to know them and what they're trying to do, you're going to naturally see opportunities, or they're going to say, yeah, well, we're moving forward with this in just a little bit, so we're going to change the timeline in this. And you say, oh, that's interesting, because if you did this for this part of the project, you would have XYZ results. Of course, I realize that's very vague and a terrible example, but my point is that when you're in a company, you get to know them better, and you have the opportunity to pitch them on things that are going to be valuable to their company. Whether you're pitching or repitching, you're never begging for work. That's one of the reasons why our value-based pitching works so well, because you're always putting the client and the client's needs first. Now, obviously not to your own detriment, but you're staying focused on what they need. And that's exactly what you're doing with repitching. You're being even more valuable because you're suggesting something that maybe they hadn't even thought of yet, but that would help their business.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the things to think about with repitching in particular, but even pitching initially a new brand new client, is to think about opportunities for recurring work. So things like a monthly newsletter, things like ads, if they're testing ads, can be a great thing to continually renew and refresh and redo. Videos, if they're putting out, they need scripts for videos that they're doing each month, or frankly, even just, they have a bunch of work and they need you for 10, 20 hours a month, looking for ways to pitch recurring work, but also give clients the opportunity to say, hey, I know you have a lot of different work, and giving them that option of putting you on a retainer, which means essentially that they, whether it's 10 hours, 20 hours, whatever it is, that they have you kind of blocked off for certain time each week or each month, depending on the needs and how you structure it. But that can be a great way to at least have a baseline of like, okay, I know that this client, month over month, I have this much income. And you can kind of plan then your pitching and your other work around that to make sure that you're hitting your financial goals, whatever they may be, whether it is $10,000 a month, or whether it's something else each month. But having some recurring work can really make that kind of planning, it helps you plan a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the tricky thing sometimes is that when you have one or two retainer clients, or regular work, we can sometimes think, well, look, I'm full. I've got all this regular work. This is great. This is going to last forever. It Nothing lasts forever, right? Nothing. At some point, all these clients are going to, the priorities are going to change, or people in the company are going to change. Or you may decide that you don't want to work with them. My
Mm-hmm.
point is, and those of you who are savvy and have been listening for a while may know what's going to come, that in order to maintain a 5-figure per month income, or quite frankly, even high 4-figure, or you have to be regularly pitching. And I know you might think, well, but if I have all these clients and I'm really, really full, they will not last forever. At a certain point, you will need to fill that in. So even if you are perfectly full, you are at capacity, maybe even some weeks you're like, oh, I've got a little bit too much, you still need to be sending out pitches. Even
Mm-hmm.
if it's only a couple of pitches a week, you need to keep yourself in the pitching game. Number one, because you need to keep having those client calls with potential clients. One student that we work with in our CCA Next Level program, she has herself booked out months in advance. And quite frankly, how nice would that feel to not like, oh, what am I going to do this month? But to know that you are set for the next several
Mm-hmm.
months. And part of that is just talking regularly to current clients, but also part of that is regularly pitching and setting themselves up for months out. even if it's just a couple of pitches, on top of the fact too that once you stop pitching, it can be a little bit harder to get back to it. So keep yourself in the habit. It's like with any habit, once you stop doing it, it can be a little tricky to get back into it.
Mm-hmm.
So keep pitching regularly. Don't let yourself get rusty. Just make it part of your process.
Yeah. And remember that as part of that, when they come back to you, you don't have to take on the project right away. And half the time, they won't need it right away. So if you can book yourself out like that, that's a great way, a great strategy for hitting your income goals, because you're looking ahead versus looking them in the immediate and thinking, oh my gosh, in order to hit this financial goal, I have to do something right this second.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the place you want to be operating your business from. You want to be operating your business from a place of, I'm great right now, and so I'm booking out and continually looking for ways to book out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you don't have to take any project, right? Even though,
Yeah.
even if you pitch a company, if they want to work with you, you don't have to take that work. And or if they want to work with you, but the timing doesn't work out, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
align with what you're able to do, you don't have to. You didn't promise anything by pitching a company and by having a call with them. You are still in control of your own schedule and your own workload. But that does bring us to the next topic when it comes to companies that don't want to pay what you
Mm-hmm.
might want to charge.
Yeah, we hinted at this earlier. And in addition to always reevaluating your rates and making sure you're raising them, you want to also have your no lower than rate. So this is, you need to set this. You need to set your rate, but you also need to set your no lower than rate. And so of course you have your rate that you're going to pitch any client and kind of what you go with. But sometimes, for some clients, you might be willing to have a little flexibility. You might say, I have time in my schedule and I really want to fill it. Again, you want to be filling your schedule out ahead so you don't fall into this trap of just having to take whatever you get. Um, but you also, maybe you want to work in a new industry. You want a portfolio piece. You want the experience of working with a particular company because of the name, because of the people that work there, whatever it is. You want to give yourself that flexibility to take on work as you need it, because there's, again, more to copywriting than just money. There's the fun, there's the opportunities for more work down the line. You might be positioning yourself to break into a certain area, whatever it is. All too often, though, copywriters get in the position of, well, I'm just going to take this work because it's what's here. And I don't care that it's, half my regular rate. I need the work. I need the work. When instead you could be using that time saying no to a client who won't pay your rate to pitch and work with clients that will pay your full rate. And they exist, as you know. So you need to have that price where you're willing to walk away, to say, you know what, this is way lower than I can even make possible. So it makes it easy to say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having those parameters gives you it. You don't have to waffle about should I, shouldn't I. If your standard rate is 65 and your no lower than rate is 55, you absolutely will not do any work with a client for lower than 55. If a client you kind of are interested in comes in at 45 or 50 or even 54, right? If they come in, you say, nope, you don't say this to them, but in your head, you say, nope, that is lower and this lower than my no or lower than number. That is lower
Mm-hmm.
than I'm willing to work for, and the decision is made. That it kind of goes
Mm-hmm.
back to, I think they will, in the tech industry, they love to talk about how Steve Jobs would wear the exact same thing every single, or had multiple versions of the exact same thing, because
Mm-hmm.
he didn't want to have to deal with making that tiny little decision, because we have to make thousands of decisions. So he's saving himself that decision fatigue. Whatever you do with that. But this is one of those instances where you can save yourself the time and the anxiety of going, well, should I, shouldn't I? Set yourself a boundary. My standard rate is this. Sometimes, and this is not something you say to a client, but you know it. My standard rate is 60. Then again, in this example, my standard rate is 65. And in special circumstances, I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to work for as low as 55, but that is the lowest. And how do you figure out this rate? Well, it's going to be different for everybody, right?
Yeah, and bullet out what your parameters are, what those special circumstances are to take on that lower rate. So it shouldn't be just, here's my no lower, I'll take whatever it is if as long as they hit my no lower then. No, if they don't meet your criteria, whatever it is of, hey, it's X industry, it is this type of piece for my portfolio, if they don't meet whatever your parameters are of willing to break your regular rate, then you also say no. Even if they do hit $55, $60, if they don't meet whatever those parameters you set for yourself, you walk away.
That's a great point. It's such a great point. Because if all of a sudden you're kind of willing to take every client at 55, then guess what? Your rate isn't 65, your rate is 55. And then
Mm-hmm.
you've shifted everything down. That's such a good point, Kate.
Yeah. And just remember, you leave this opportunity. It's not that you don't have work now, it's that you have space to take on work that people are willing to pay at your regular rate.
Which goes back to that pitching, that you will always pitch regularly so that you always have clients that you can backfill in, because there are going, we're just, that's how it goes, that's how it works. Kate and I have been doing this for a very long time, and we will still talk to clients who will pitch our rates to them and they'll go, oh no, 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 no. And we'll say, we'll go through the whole discussion, what's your budget, what's it, and it's just lower than we're willing to work for. We will still have to walk away from clients. That's going to happen all the time. Just as not every client is going to hire you, not every client is going to pay the rate that you want to pay. But that does not mean that no client is going to hire you, or no client is going to pay the rate that you want to earn, or the rate that you have set. Just know that that's part of the process. Some clients are not going to pay that rate, but there are plenty of clients that will pay that rate. But knowing what your boundaries are and what your parameters are mean that you can focus on those clients that are willing to pay that higher rate, and give yourself that's just that little bit of wiggle room for special scenarios to do work at a slightly lower rate. But it should truly be,
Mhm.
to Kate's point, a special scenario.
Yeah. And then the last thing that also ties into rates is thinking about your pricing in terms of value.
I think especially newer copywriters may think, well, I've only been practicing copywriting
Mhm.
for 6 months, or I've only been practicing copy for however long. But the length of time that you're practicing copywriting, it doesn't mean anything, right? Someone could be quote unquote practicing copywriting for 6 months and not write a single piece. So, put big quotes around practicing, but we see this. Or not even really fully know what copywriting is. There are plenty of people out there who are content writers and they're trying to get copywriting work and can't understand why they can't. But that's not you, dear listener or viewer. Um, Whereas you putting in 6 months may have been a lot of study and a lot of practice and all that kind of stuff. And my point is that you are bringing value to your client. Copywriting is incredibly valuable. You guys know that Filthy Rich Writer, that the CC is one part of our company. I also coach digital business owners. And one of the things that I teach them, and one of the things that business owners as a whole understand, is that messaging is the most important part of their businesses. Like they could have the best product or service in the world, but if they can't convey why it's so good to their target audience, they won't have a business. And I think we forget sometimes, once we acquire a skill, we forget that the rest of the people in the world didn't simultaneously acquire that skill, right? Just because you get to a level of skill and ability, it doesn't mean that it simultaneously then became easy for everybody else. Just because you can do it doesn't mean everybody else can. And I would say, especially when it comes to copywriting, you can do it, and the vast majority of other people can't do it. And so, what you are doing when you are writing copy is you are literally helping companies, helping organizations meet their goals. And as you're thinking about your rates, and as you're thinking about who you're going to pitch and how you're going to pitch, don't forget to respect yourself as a professional and respect the skills that you have developed and you will continue to develop, right? Because we're never done learning. But what you do is valuable, and you have to go into every interaction with a potential client, with a current client, with anyone who wants to pick your brain, or let me just buy a cup of coffee and ask you about my messaging. go into it. I don't recommend, but go into it remembering, understanding, and owning how valuable it is, or how valuable what we do is.
Mm-hmm. And so if you're the type of person that goes to send a quote and you've put together your pricing and you've done all the work and you've like, I've factored in meetings and emails and I did factored in all the things, and you get to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to charge 1,500 or 2,000 or whatever your number is for this project. And you start to feel, oh, that's really high. Oh, that's really high. Okay, I did all the math and this is right. And this is what it's going to take. But 2,000 feels like a lot. So I'm just going to, maybe I'll make it 1,750 because that feels a little low and maybe they'll accept. Take your pricing, dear listener or viewer, and send it. Do not second guess the work. If anything, second guess in the other direction. Did I factor in enough time for meetings and emails and all of this? Do I need to actually pad a couple more hours because I'm not quite sure? This is a little bit of a gray area. It's a new client. I haven't worked with them. It might be that this takes a little bit longer than I thought, that I budgeted for. That's where I would encourage you to always look up, never lower than that initial math that you did to come to your quote. Because the vast majority of the time, we are undervaluing what we do and we are second guessing all of the value that we have to bring. And so then we're cutting our quotes and we're saying, I'm too hesitant to hit send on this quote. Oh my gosh, it's the biggest thing. Yes, feel those feelings, but hit send anyway.
Yes.
Say, okay, I put this together. You know what? Because the worst case that happens, they come back and say, actually, that's too high. And then you can negotiate and say, okay, really want this client. I really want to work with them. Okay, maybe the 1750 quote was the lowest I was willing to go. So let me see if I can talk with them and see if that works with their budget. But why? Why throw up a roadblock for yourself before your clients have even thrown one up for you? You have no idea. They might very well just take your quote and say, yes, absolutely. So don't try to think about where they're coming from. No, you put together your quote. That's what the value is. That's what you have. That's what you came up with. Stick with it, and then worry about having to change it or amend it down the line if needed. If really big if needed.
It is always, always better to quote higher. Now, we're not saying like, I think reasonable would be 3,000, so I'm going to quote 5,000. We're not saying go crazy here, but it's always better to quote on the higher side, because that does give you some wiggle room for negotiation. If you're hearing negotiation, you go, oh God, that sounds scary. Like it's, when you go into a car dealership and you have to play hardball. That's not what this is at all. In this case, negotiation is just a conversation. If you quote 2,000 and they come back and they say, oh, actually that's a little bit outside of our budget. All you have to do is come back and say, okay, what is your budget? And then when you find out what their budget is, number one, you can figure out, because now you already know what your lowest rate that you're willing to do is, and maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. But you can also then look at what you put together and say, okay, well that's less than I would normally do, but maybe because you're a new client, I'd really like to start working with you. Maybe that, or maybe you can look at what you put together and said, okay, well, I can't make that work with the quote the way it is. But if we took out this piece, which I think is important, but maybe does not need to be done immediately, if we took out this piece, then yep, we can fit that into your budget, which in that case, then you are also, by the way, still making the rate that you wanted to make. You've just made the project slightly smaller in order to fit into their budget. That's what we mean when it comes to negotiation. It's not, I'll do it for this much. No, we'll do it for. You're not, haggling at a market somewhere. You're just having a conversation. You may still get to the point where they want to do the full amount for less than you want to do it. Like we said, you may still get to the point where you just, unfortunately, this doesn't work. But pitching higher lets you have that conversation, and because I don't think I've encountered maybe one. We have trained 10,000 students. So maybe like a handful out of 10,000 go in feeling really, really confident and pitch a lot higher than they should automatically. Not even a lot higher, but pitch a higher rate automatically. The vast majority of us go in and tend to undercut our rates before it even
Mm-hmm.
gets to the client. To Kate's point, why are you putting up these barriers? Don't cut yourself off at the knees before it even gets to the client. Quote a rate that you are comfortable with. And again, maybe utch it up, technical term, technical financial term, utch
Mm-hmm.
it up just a little bit to make sure that you are absolutely quoting what you deserve to be paid and that you're covering off in case there's some time that you didn't factor in, or in case you tend to send a quick email to a client ends up being a 15-minute email to a client because you're great and you're over delivering and you want to make sure they understand everything. But when that happens with every single email, so it value yourself is, I guess, what it's coming
Mm-hmm.
back to. Value yourself and don't be afraid to have conversations about your rates, because that's all they are. It's just a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we provided you with a lot. We talked about pitching, we talked about repitching, we talked about rates, we talked about negotiating, we talked about setting up boundaries and parameters. And I think maybe that's the one point that I want to end on, is that if you want to get yourself to a 5-figure a month business, you have to treat yourself like a 5-figure a month asset. Meaning that if you don't take care of this asset, this producer of copy who is you, if you don't take care of yourself and if you don't set up boundaries and if you don't adhere to those boundaries, because it's one thing to set up a boundary with a client but let them run all over you, that's not actually a boundary. And if you don't take care of yourself and if you don't give yourself the time off when you need to, and if you don't
Take a vacation.
take a vacation, if you don't respect yourself enough to claim the rates that you should be working for, no one's going to do it for you. No one is coming to save you. No one is coming to take care of you. You have to take care of yourself. And someone who gets to the level of 5 figures a month has to lean into respecting themselves and taking care of themselves as a professional. So we've given you a lot to think about today. If you weren't taking notes on the way through, I would go back and take notes, because we're not at all joking when we say that this is the roadmap to getting yourself to that next level in your copywriting career. So go back, take some notes, and then start implementing. And if you're a CCA student, let us know how you are implementing in the Facebook group, on the coaching calls. Let us know, because we are here to support you always and answer any questions you have. If you're getting into something, and obviously these were kind of high level, and when get into the details of how to raise your rates, get into the details of how to have these conversations with clients, guys, that's what we're here for. So with that, we will catch you all in the next episode. Bye, everybody. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe so you never miss a video. And if you're ready to take the first step toward becoming a copywriter yourself, sign up for a free video training right here.